It all happened in the blink of an eye. We were driving back from a weekend trip. Me, my husband Jason, and a friend of his, Emily. She was someone I had never been fully comfortable with. I always felt like there was something left unsaid between them, something unspoken. But I brushed those thoughts aside. After all, Jason reassured me that Emily was nothing more than a childhood friend. The road stretched endlessly before us, winding through a quiet countryside. I remember the smell of pine trees, the soft hum of the car engine, and the warm sun filtering through the windshield. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. Then, everything shattered. The car swerved violently. Jason shouted, yanking the steering wheel as the tires screeched against the asphalt. I barely had time to react before we slammed into the guardrail. The impact was deafening, and everything went black for a moment. When I came to, my body was pinned awkwardly against the seat, my legs trapped beneath twisted metal. Pain shot through me like lightning, radiating from my ribs and chest. Smoke filled the air, and the acrid smell of burning rubber made it hard to breathe. I turned my head, wincing from the sharp ache in my neck. Jason was already unbuckling himself, his face pale but focused. He was okay. Relief washed over me for a split second before I heard her voice. "Jason?" Emily whimpered from the back seat. I can't move my leg." Jason froze, his eyes darting between me and her. Then, without a word, he turned his back to me and climbed into the back seat. "Emily, stay with me. I'll get you out," he said, his voice trembling. "What about me?" "Jason," I croaked, my throat dry and my voice barely above a whisper. I tried again, louder this time. "Jason, I'm stuck." He didn't even look at me. All I could hear was his frantic reassurance to Emily as he worked to free her from the wreckage. Pain and confusion gripped me. The metal crushed against my legs felt like a vice tightening with every second. I struggled to free myself, my hands trembling as I clawed at the seat belt. "Jason, please, I need your help." Still nothing. I could see his shadow moving in the smoke-filled car, his arms wrapped around Emily as he carefully eased her out of the back seat. My breath quickened, each gasp sending sharp jolts of pain through my chest. He carried her, and left me there. My voice cracked as I screamed his name one last time. "Jason?" But by then, the car had started to fill with smoke, and their figures faded into the distance. I was alone. The moment Jason disappeared from my view, reality hit me like a second crash. The air inside the car was getting thicker, heavier. Every breath felt like dragging shards of glass into my lungs. I tried to move again, but the twisted metal around my legs didn't budge. My hands shook as I pressed against the door, the dashboard, anything I could reach. Pain flared through my body with every movement, but I couldn't stop. "Help! Somebody help me!" I screamed, my voice cracking as smoke stung my throat. The world outside was eerily quiet. I could hear faint voices in the distance, Jason's voice, Emily's sobs, but they were fading. My heart pounded as panic clawed at my chest. I thought of everything that had brought me to this moment. Jason, the man I'd trusted with my life, my love, my everything, had chosen someone else. Someone who wasn't his wife. The irony of it all was almost too cruel to bear. I pressed my palms to the steering wheel, tears streaming down my face, mixing with the blood from a cut on my forehead. The harder I pushed, the more hopeless it felt. My legs were completely trapped, and every movement sent searing pain up my spine. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. Smoke began to fill my vision, curling around me like a suffocating blanket. My mind raced. If I didn't get out soon, I wouldn't have the chance to ask why he left me, why he chose her. "Stay calm," I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. "You can do this." I reached for the glove compartment, fumbling blindly until my fingers wrapped around the metal handle. I yanked it open, hoping to find something, anything that could help me. A flashlight. It was small, cheap, the kind you'd pick up at a gas station without thinking twice. But in that moment, it felt like a lifeline. I turned it on, the beam of light cutting through the smoke. I shone it down toward my legs, assessing the damage for the first time. The sight made me sick to my stomach. Blood soaked my jeans, and my ankle was twisted at an unnatural angle. The metal frame of the car pressed so tightly against my thighs that I couldn't even wiggle my toes. "Think," I muttered. "Think, think, think." Outside, I heard a crackle. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, more menacing. Flames. They were licking up the side of the car, hungrily devouring the wreckage. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't have much time. I tried the door handle again, pulling with all the strength I had left. It didn't budge. The metal had warped in the crash, sealing me inside. My arms gave out, and I slumped back against the seat, gasping for air. I thought of Jason again, his voice, his face, his promises. "We'll always have each other," he used to say, holding my hand as if nothing in the world could break us. I laughed bitterly, choking on the smoke. Where was he now? The crackling flames grew louder, and the heat pressed against my skin. My head started to spin, the edges of my vision blurring. I tried to stay awake, to fight, but my body was giving up faster than my mind. In that moment, a single thought consumed me. If this is how it ends, I hope he remembers what he's done. The heat was unbearable now. Flames crept closer, licking the edges of the car, feeding on the wreckage like a predator circling its prey. My vision blurred from the smoke, and each breath felt heavier than the last. I tried one more time to scream for help. "Jason! Jason, come back!" But deep down, I already knew. He wasn't coming, and neither was anyone else. Tears mixed with the sweat and blood on my face. My body screamed in pain, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. How could he abandon me like this? After everything we'd been through together, I had given him my heart, my trust, my loyalty, and in the moment I needed him most, he chose her. Emily. The name rang in my mind like a cruel joke. She wasn't just his childhood friend. I had always known there was more to their story, but Jason brushed off my concerns with the kind of casual ease that made me feel foolish for even doubting him. "She's like family," he'd say. "Don't overthink it." Overthink it? I was overthinking nothing. The truth was right here, choking me alongside the smoke filling my lungs. He didn't even hesitate when it came to saving her. The memory of their laughter on the trip echoed in my mind. Jason's jokes, Emily's too-perfect smile, the way they exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I wanted to believe it was innocent. But now, with death looming over me, every detail came crashing back like a wave of cold reality. This wasn't an accident of circumstance. This was the moment that revealed the truth. I had never been his priority. The fire roared louder, snapping me back to the present. My head throbbed as the air grew thinner. I couldn't tell if I was crying from the pain or the betrayal anymore. My fingers fumbled with the seatbelt, slick with sweat and blood. The buckle wouldn't release. I clawed at it desperately, knowing that every second counted. Suddenly, a memory from earlier that day flashed through my mind. Jason insisting that Emily sit in the back seat because it would be safer. Safer? For her? The bitterness in my heart surged. He had been protecting her all along, even then. Through the haze of smoke, I caught a faint shadow outside the car. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered in my chest. Was it Jason? Was he coming back for me? But the shadow moved away, closer to where Emily had been resting on the side of the road. My hope withered as I realized it wasn't Jason. It was someone else, maybe a stranger passing by. And they were helping her. I was invisible, forgotten. The flames crackled louder, snapping and hissing as they closed in. The heat scorched my skin, and the metal of the car began to groan under the pressure. Was it fate? Karma? Or had I simply trusted the wrong person for far too long? The smoke filled my lungs again, forcing me into a violent coughing fit. I was dizzy now, my mind slipping in and out of consciousness. But as the world began to blur, I made a promise to myself. If I don't make it out of this alive, I will find a way to make him remember, to make him regret, even if it takes my last breath. The world around me dimmed, the edges of my vision darkening as smoke and exhaustion pulled me toward unconsciousness. My body felt heavy, my lungs burning as they fought for air. I thought this was it, the end. But then, through the haze, I heard voices, faint at first, barely audible over the crackling of the flames. Then closer. Clearer. "Is anyone else in the car?" It wasn't Jason's voice. "No, just me and her," I heard Emily reply weakly, her voice trembling. The words pierced me like a knife. My chest tightened as her casual dismissal echoed in my mind. Just me and her. That's all I was to them. A fleeting mention, an afterthought. The voice from earlier called out again. "Are you sure? What about the driver?" "She's fine," Emily muttered quickly, almost dismissively. "She can get out on her own." My heart sank. I wanted to scream, to shout the truth. that I wasn't fine, that I was trapped and the fire was closing in. But my voice came out as little more than a hoarse whisper, lost in the chaos. I gritted my teeth, summoning every ounce of strength I had left. My fingers clawed at the seatbelt buckle again, the jagged metal cutting into my hands as I struggled. Blood dripped down my fingers, but I didn't care. "I'm here," I rasped, barely audible. "I'm still here." But no one heard me. Outside, I saw the shadows shift again. Someone was coming closer to the wreckage. My pulse quickened. Maybe, just maybe, they would see me. But as the shadow grew clearer, my hope evaporated. It was Jason, and he wasn't coming for me. I watched as he knelt beside Emily, holding her hand as paramedics tended to her injuries. His face was pale, his expression one of pure desperation. Desperation for her. "Stay with me, Emily," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "You're going to be okay, I've got you." His words were like acid on an open wound. I tried to lift my hand, to wave, to get his attention, but my body wouldn't obey. The smoke was too thick, my strength nearly gone. I wanted to scream at him, to demand he look at me, his wife, trapped and dying just a few feet away, but his eyes never left her. The heat grew unbearable again, the fire creeping closer. My breaths came in short, shallow gasps as my head spun. The edges of my vision blurred until all I could see was Jason cradling Emily, his face full of concern. For her. Only her. And in that moment, something inside me broke. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was empty. Because the truth was painfully clear now. I had spent years building my life around someone who never truly saw me. And now, at the end of it all, he didn't even realize I was still here. The paramedics began loading Emily onto a stretcher, Jason following closely behind. I wanted to call out to them, to beg them to check the car one last time, but as they moved farther away, their voices fading into the distance, I knew they wouldn't. They were leaving me behind. Again. The crackling of the flames was all I could hear now, growing louder as the fire consumed the car. My strength was gone, my body limp against the seat. For the first time in my life, I stopped fighting. The silence was deafening. Even the roar of the flames and the groaning of the car's frame seemed distant now, muted by the weight pressing on my chest. They were gone. Jason, Emily, the paramedics. All of them. The faint sound of sirens in the distance told me they had left, speeding away to safety, without me. My body felt heavy, my head resting limply against the seat. The smoke coiled around me, thick and suffocating, but my mind was sharper than ever. I thought of Jason, the man who had promised me the world, who vowed to love me in sickness and in health through thick and thin. The man who, without hesitation, had chosen someone else over me. Not once had he looked back. Not once had he stopped to wonder if I needed him. My chest tightened with bitterness. For years, I had been blind to the signs. The lingering glances he gave Emily, the inside jokes they shared, the way his face lit up whenever she called. And I ignored it all because I believed in him. How foolish I had been. I coughed weakly, my throat raw and dry, the taste of ash on my tongue. My hand still rested on the seatbelt, bloodied and useless. I didn't have the strength to try again, but the pain of betrayal burned hotter than the flames around me. Was this all I was worth to him? Was this what my love, my loyalty, meant? The fire crept closer, the heat brushing against my skin like a cruel reminder of how little time I had left. But even as the smoke choked me, my thoughts didn't turn to fear. They turned to anger. He left me. He left me, and he didn't even hesitate. The weight of my emotions was heavier than the wreckage trapping me. Anger, grief, betrayal, they surged through me like a storm, drowning out the pain and the heat. The smoke thickened, and my breaths became shallow. I felt my consciousness slipping, the edges of my vision growing darker with every passing second. But I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. If this was the end for me, I wanted to make sure he remembered. I closed my eyes, my thoughts filled with the faces of those who had betrayed me. Jason, with his hollow promises, Emily, with her quiet smugness, and me, the woman who gave everything and received nothing in return. As my vision blurred and my body weakened, a single thought consumed me. If I have to leave this world, I'll leave a scar on theirs. Everything faded, the flames, the smoke, even the searing pain in my body. It was as though the world had gone silent. For the first time since the crash, I felt weightless. Was this death? I opened my eyes, expecting darkness, but instead I saw light. It wasn't the blinding heavenly kind they talk about in movies. It was soft, faint, almost otherworldly. And then I saw myself. My body. Trapped in the wreckage, still slumped against the seat. The flames had reached the hood of the car, and the entire frame creaked under the pressure. It was surreal, looking at myself from the outside, as though I were an observer in someone else's tragedy. I hovered there, somewhere between the car and the empty stretch of road where Jason had abandoned me. Abandoned. The words stabbed at my heart even now, though I wasn't sure if I still had one. I turned away from the wreckage, and there they were, Jason and Emily, just a short distance up the road. The paramedics had placed her on a stretcher, wrapping her leg while Jason hovered beside her. His face was etched with worry, his hand gripping hers as though she were the one who had just lost everything. "I'll stay with you," he murmured, his voice soft and filled with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere." I drifted closer, unseen, unheard, a silent witness to his betrayal. She looked up at him, her pale face illuminated by the flashing lights of the ambulance. "Thank you, Jason," she whispered. Her voice cracked, and tears glistened in her eyes. "You saved me." He smiled at her, a soft, tender smile I hadn't seen in years. Saved her. The words echoed in my mind, louder and louder until they were all I could hear. What about me? The car was now engulfed in flames, the smoke rising high into the night sky. They didn't even glance back. Not once. As the paramedics prepared to lift Emily into the ambulance, I noticed a look pass between them, Jason and Emily. It was fleeting, but it was enough. The way his hand lingered on hers, the way her lips trembled, as though she wanted to say more, but didn't. This wasn't just gratitude. This was something more. Something I had always suspected, but never dared to confront. I wanted to scream at him, to force him to see what he had done. But no sound came. I was nothing but a shadow now, powerless to stop them. The ambulance doors closed, and as it pulled away, Jason climbed into the front seat. He didn't look back at the wreckage. He didn't look back at me. And in that moment, I realized the truth. I had died for him, and he didn't even care. The ambulance sped away, its sirens wailing in the distance, leaving me behind in the smoldering silence of my final moments. The wreckage of the car was a twisted monument to the betrayal I had suffered. My body remained there, lifeless, as I hovered above it, watching the fire consume everything. But I wasn't gone. Not completely. Something anchored me to this world, a force stronger than the flames or the smoke. It was the anger, the grief, the raw injustice of it all. I couldn't leave, not like this, not without making him understand what he had done. I drifted, weightless, carried by a tide of emotion toward the ambulance disappearing into the distance. Time didn't seem to matter anymore. The world was a blur of shapes and shadows. All that existed was my determination to confront him, to make him see. When I reached the hospital, I found Jason pacing the sterile white halls outside Emily's room. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders hunched as though the weight of the world rested on them. Good. I wanted him to feel the weight. Inside the room, Emily lay in a bed, her leg wrapped in bandages. Her face was pale but serene, and Jason's gaze softened every time he looked at her through the glass window. "She's lucky to have you," one of the nurses said as she passed by, offering him a kind smile. He nodded, his lips curling into a faint smile. "She's always been important to me. Always." The word struck me like a dagger. It confirmed what I had suspected all along. I had been nothing more than a placeholder, a convenience. His heart had always belonged to her. I moved closer, my presence invisible but heavy. I wanted him to feel me there, to feel the weight of the promises he had broken, the love he had abandoned. Jason's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out with a sigh. His face twisted as he read the screen. "What do you mean she didn't make it?" he muttered under his breath. I knew instantly he was talking about me. My body must have been recovered from the wreckage by now. He closed his eyes, his expression unreadable. Was it guilt? Regret? I wanted to believe it was, but the next words he spoke shattered that hope. "I don't know what to say to her family," he murmured. She didn't deserve this. Not I didn't deserve this. She. Even in death, I was just someone else's problem for him to deal with. I wanted to rage, to scream, to tear through the walls and force him to face what he had done. But instead, I found myself drawn into Emily's room. She was awake now, her eyes fluttering open as Jason stepped inside. He rushed to her side, his hand immediately finding hers. "Jason," she whispered, her voice weak but full of emotion. "I'm here," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'll always be here." I lingered in the corner of the room, watching the scene unfold like a cruel parody of the life I thought I had with him. Emily's lips trembled, and tears welled up in her eyes. "You saved me," she said. "You risked everything for me." His hand tightened around hers. "I couldn't let anything happen to you. I've already lost too much." Lost too much. The irony of his words twisted inside me like a knife. He didn't lose me. I was right there, and he had chosen to leave me behind. As I watched him cradle her hand, whispering reassurances I would never hear, a cold realization settled over me. He didn't deserve my love. He didn't deserve my forgiveness. But he would remember me. I would make sure of it. I watched them from the corner of the room, unseen, unheard, a ghost of the love I once believed was unbreakable. Jason stayed by Emily's side, holding her hand as if it was the most natural thing in the world, as though I had never existed. But I did exist. And I wasn't leaving without leaving a mark. As he whispered soft reassurances to Emily, I felt the air around me shift. The room grew colder, the shadows lengthened. My anger pulsed, an unrelenting force that demanded to be heard. Jason's words blurred into static, his voice distant as I focused all my energy on one thing, making him feel my presence. The lights flickered. Jason froze mid-sentence, glancing up at the ceiling. Emily stirred in her bed, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "What was that?" she murmured. Jason shook his head, his face pale. "It's probably nothing. Just a power surge." But I wasn't done. The heart monitor next to Emily beeped erratically, its rhythm matching the fury in my chest. The flickering lights cast jagged shadows across the room, and the air turned icy. Jason's breath hitched as he looked around, his expression shifting from confusion to unease. "Jason?" Emily's voice trembled. "I feel strange." He reached for her, his hand gripping hers tighter. "It's okay. I'm here. You're safe?" Safe? I almost laughed at the irony. Safe was the last thing he deserved to feel. The glass of water on the bedside table rattled violently before shattering, sending shards flying across the floor. Jason leapt to his feet, his eyes wide with panic. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted, his voice cracking. I moved closer to him, though he couldn't see me. But he could feel me. I knew it. The weight of my presence pressed down on him, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. He looked around frantically, as if searching for something, or someone. "Jason!" Emily cried, her voice rising. "What's happening?" But he couldn't answer her. Because deep down, he knew. The shadows in the room deepened, wrapping around him like the suffocating smoke that had taken my last breath. I whispered his name, low and cold, letting it echo in the hollow space between us. "Jason." He froze, his body rigid. His head turned slowly, his eyes scanning the room. "Who's there?" he stammered. The lights flickered again, and for a brief moment I saw it. The guilt, the regret, the realization of what he had done. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't." But his words rang hollow. He had chosen. He had left me. And now he would live with the consequences. The monitor beeped wildly again, and Emily screamed. Jason grabbed her hand, his voice shaking as he tried to calm her. "It's okay, everything's fine." But it wasn't fine, and it never would be. I drifted closer, so close I could almost touch him. The rage inside me burned brighter than the flames that had consumed me. My whispers filled the room, wrapping around him like a noose. "You left me, Jason. You left me to die." His face crumpled, his knees buckling as he dropped to the floor. "I'm sorry," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry." But his apology came too late. The room grew still again, the lights stabilizing, the air warming. I stepped back, watching him crumble under the weight of his guilt. It wasn't enough to bring me back. It wasn't enough to erase what he had done, but it was enough to scar him forever. I turned toward the window, the soft glow of the moonlight drawing me away. For the first time, I felt a strange sense of peace. My anger had been heard, my pain acknowledged. Jason would live the rest of his life haunted by what he had done, by the memory of the woman he left behind, and I would finally let go. As the last of my presence faded, I left them with one final whisper. A truth they could never escape. "You'll remember me, always." And then I was gone.